So Dustin the Diamond Poirier.
Oh, yeah.
This is one of those ones where I'm happy to say that my prediction was wrong.
Right.
I thought the young man, Benoit Saint-Denis, this up-and-coming lion, was going to be just too much for the grizzled veteran, and I was wrong. Listen, it wasn't without Benoit having his moments. Benoit Saint-Denis looked like he absolutely belongs in the top 5, but Dustin Poirier reminded us just how good he actually is last night. His boxing looked superb. That's actually what got the job done for him. His coach, Dia Davis, deserves a lot of credit. He looks as clean as ever with those combinations. And listen, he broke the Gaethje curse. Everybody says when you lose a fight to Justin Gaethje, you're never the same fighter. And I think if you look up the statistics, pretty much everybody goes on these insane losing streaks after losing to Justin Gaethje. So the fact that he came back in at the number 3 spot, got himself back in the win column, and now, listen, Islam Makhachev is saying he's impressed with that performance and he wants to fight in June. So who knows what's going to happen. First, I want to talk about Dustin Poirier's incredible come-from-behind victory, and then we'll get into what might be next for him.
Well, yeah, last week when we were doing the predictions, I said, y'all must have forgot. This is Dustin Poirier we're talking about, and everybody's putting money on him, and now he's the underdog against this guy who's never even been to the top 10 of the UFC. And Dustin Poirier, I think the stat you told me last night was he's been in the UFC's top 10 for 155 for the past 8 years.
Yeah.
So ridiculous. But I was thinking I was going to be eating my words, and I was watching a literal changing of the guards in the first round. I was pretty concerned for my pick. And while I did have to stick to my guns and go with Dustin the Diamond Poirier, I was pretty worried after that first round because Benoit looked very promising. Look, his grappling is tenacious. He's very good at, mixing things up, not only getting his opponents to the ground. And if you can get Dustin Poirier to the ground in the first round, you're doing something right, and your future is looking pretty bright. But when Dustin was able to work himself back up to his feet, then the clinch work was almost equally as vicious out of Benoit. Benoit's knees, elbows, everything he throws has killer, killer intentions behind it. He's got bad intentions on everything he throws, but live by the sword, die by the sword. He had no gas going into that second round. And I think he realized that I got to get this guy out of here because I'm hitting him with some pretty hard shots, not only punches and kicks, but I'm throwing some elbows and knees that are landing on Dustin, and they're still not putting him down. And I think the reason Dustin Poirier, for a lot of reasons, he's people's favorite fighter, people love him, and he's a major star in the UFC. But one thing is he gets you going. He gets you on the edge of your seat, whether you want to see him lose or you want to see him win. Man, especially if you have a special place in your heart for him, you're like, oh my God, dude, can you please start throwing something back?
Yeah.
Can you please move your head a little bit? And he'll get you a little frustrated as a fan, especially if you're somebody that bets on him. But Dustin Poirier was able to keep his composure and then ultimately find his spots. And that was really, really just a perfect example of what Dustin Poirier is. He's a fighter. He's always going to find himself in dogfights because he only fights the absolute best in the world. And while he was in the good old boys club at the top of the loft, sitting nice and pretty at 155, not having to fight anybody that's a newcomer, he decided, you know what? I'm going to give this guy a chance, just like Eddie Alvarez gave me a chance years ago. And that's the way this sport goes. I love when somebody is a historian, a fan of the sport, while they're also competing, and they understand the business, right? I got my opportunity, and it would be wrong if I didn't give the next generation their opportunity. And so many people were saying, man, Dustin's too old. Benoit's the new generation. He's young. He's hungry. He's vicious. His record is beautiful. And this is just going to be the first night of the decline of Dustin Poirier. But, man, that finishing sequence was beautiful. Like you said, Dia Davis needs all the credit in the world. I think what he's doing for boxing inside of MMA is maybe uncontested as far as any other coach right now. There's some great boxing coaches, Trevor Whitman, Jason Perillo, there's some Bob Perez, tons of great striking coaches in MMA, but Dia Davis, as far as the hands go, he's putting it together really well, and his star pupil, Dustin Poirier, is proving time and time and again why, even at 36 years old, he belongs at the very top of 155.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And the thing about Benoit Saint-Denis is this is no referendum on his abilities. This guy is as vicious as they get. This wasn't like Dustin Poirier's handed a guy who's only, his best win is against Matt Frivola, which is way a far cry from the competition that Dustin has competed against throughout his whole career.
Well, we saw one completed round, and Benoit certainly won it, right?
Yeah, no doubt about that. Benoit was up 1 round to none come round number 2.
For sure.
The guillotine was interesting for me, why Dustin kept going to that. I didn't really love that for him, especially especially if he is going to fight Islam Makhachev.
He said he's still going to start. He's still going to keep doing it.
Yeah, I don't know what the jumping the guillotine thing for me, unless you've really got it cinched up. Which who am I to tell Dustin Poirier what to do inside of the octagon? But it felt like he was conceding position a little bit to go for a submission that wasn't ultra high percentage, especially against a great grappler like Benoit Saint-Denis. But listen, it didn't matter in the end. And I kind of want to talk about now a potential matchup with Islam Makhachev, because here's the reality of 155 right now. Islam Makhachev did not fight during this period of time and probably on 300 because of Ramadan.
Right.
They would have liked to have him already defended his belt again by now, likely against an actual true 155, where we had the one-off things go on with Volkanovski. But here's the reality. Justin Gaethje is about to fight Max Holloway next month. That fight is likely going to be a war. Very, very slim chance that either one of those guys can turn it around to fight Islam in June, and he does want to defend his belt in June.
Right.
Then you have Arman Tsarukyan versus Charles Oliveira. That fight is also coming up on the same card, UFC 300. Also very likely to be a war. Both guys are probably going to take some damage in that fight. Dustin Poirier, from a timing perspective, and timing is kind of everything in this sport when it comes to matchmaking. The right performance at the right time creates the right opportunity. And I don't think anybody would be mad at Dustin Poirier getting a title shot. Now, if Justin Gaethje goes out there and starches Max Holloway or beats him emphatically and doesn't take a lot of damage, then you have to give Justin the nod over Dustin, because he just finished Dustin Poirier not that long ago, so that wouldn't be fair. But if they go out there and they have a 5-round war and both guys say, look, we need 8 months, then yeah, okay, fine, revisit Justin Gaethje once the time comes towards the end of the year, but don't hold up Dustin Poirier just because he had a knockout loss against Gaethje. He bounced back from that just fine and beat a young up-and-comer. And I love that you mentioned what he said in the press conference too, how he said, Eddie Alvarez gave me the hand down and now I want to do the same thing. Dustin Poirier is not the kind of guy to rest on his laurels. And I think a lot of people thought that Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier were doing that at the top of 155 because they're like, you know what, you got these guys, these Fazeev coming up, you've got this Benoit guy, this French guy that's knocking everybody, Gamrot, everybody like that, and these Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje, these guys in their mid-30s, they're just name recognition only. They're holding on to a ranking in the pound for pound. They're holding on to a ranking at 155. They don't deserve to be there. It's like, okay, cool. Grab the scariest kickboxer you can find, Rafael Fazeev. Throw him against Justin Gaethje. How'd that work out? Oh, you got this French guy that submits everybody and knocks everybody out in the UFC, got some crazy head kicks. He's super strong, special operations. Great. Get him and give him Dustin Poirier. And what we found is, yes, times are changing. Things are evolving in MMA as they always do. And Benoit Saint-Denis 27, Dustin Poirier is 35. Make that fight, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you have a different story. But for right now, 2024, March of 2024, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Charles Oliveira, very relevant names at 155, and they're not just holding on to a number. These guys are still the best in the division.
Yeah, and they've created a bit of a logjam at 155, but it's not because they're inactive. It's not because they're refusing to fight other people. We've seen every one of them go in with one of these young, hungry lions. Charles Oliveira just signed up to fight Arman Tsarukyan, and I think the guy's 25 years old. So every one of them is willing to give these guys their opportunity. They just happen to get their hand raised when they do it, which is a great indicator that the sport is so mental. This is all about mental. It's all about mental focus, clarity, and experience. And look, if you go athleticism for athleticism, I think Fazeev is probably more athletic than Gaethje, and Benoit Saint-Denis is probably more athletic than Dustin Poirier, and I guess you could probably say Arman's more athletic than Charlie, but I just don't see these guys finding a way to beat these guys. And literally, we've seen 2 out of those 3 fights go in the way of the grizzled vet. And that means that they belong at the top of 155. And all 3 of these guys, as well as Jalen Turner and some of the other guys sitting at the top of 155, or right outside of the top of 155, they're going to have their day. They're all going to wind up in title fights or get the belt. Maybe 1 or 2 of them is going to wind up becoming the champion. But right now, as it sits, Islam Makhachev needs dance partners, and these guys gave the young men their opportunities. They beat them, and just because we saw Islam in there against some of them, just because we've seen Khabib in there against all of them basically, and he's beaten every one of them, doesn't mean that they don't deserve an opportunity again. They're doing the heavy lifting even this far into their career. Dustin Poirier could only be doing big money fights. He could say, I want to fight for a BMF, or, I want to do this or that, and just sort of pick and choose, and nobody would bat an eye. The UFC would give him exactly what he wants because he's been such a good company guy, but they're still not doing that. They want the challenges. They want the most difficult fights that the world thinks are out there for them. And look, they're looking really good doing it. I think Dustin Poirier answered a lot of questions in his own mind last night, because Benoit Saint-Denis was probably the scariest guy in the 155 division. That, Islam Makhachev, you have to say, is the top dog right now. But that wasn't in the cards.
Scariest up-and-comer, for sure.
Yeah, and he already had the Conor McGregor fight twice since Conor's been Conor, but 3 times in total. And so there was really nothing that was exciting Dustin. I was starting to worry, like, man, we're going to lose Dustin because of a lack of interest.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad to see that you have to find some guy that's a special forces, straight up legitimate killer to come in there. And that's what got Dustin excited. And you could see that anger and fire in his eye in the post-fight speech. During fight week, I was like, I don't know, does Dustin really have it? After he won that fight, I saw the fire in him. And I'm like, oh, Dustin's about to have another little run. And I think Dustin Poirier belongs in a title fight. Obviously, a fight with Islam Makhachev is a very tall order, and I would assume Islam will be the heavy favorite, and likely will get his hand raised. But Dustin Poirier belongs, and at this point, he either belongs in the marquee biggest fights you can make, or in title fights, or a combination of the two. And him versus Islam makes all the sense in the world right now. Timing is everything, like you said, in this sport. And I really think that Dustin Poirier needs to heal up and then look at June, because International Fight Week needs a main event. And I think Islam Makhachev deserves to be the last guy to walk.
Yeah, I sign me up for it. Dustin Poirier versus Islam Makhachev. The one caveat just being that if Justin Gaethje has an absolute marquee performance against Max Holloway and can turn it around quickly, then obviously Justin should get the nod. Other than that, give me Islam Dustin.
Me too.